considered orthopraxic. I would argue that esoteric forms, in contrast to the Orthodox Abrahamic type religions and the orthopraxic polytheistic traditions, that occultisms, esotericisms, Gnosticisms would be orthopathic. I would also include in that medieval forms of witchcraft, things, folk magic, things to that effect. And in definition, to give you an idea of how those differ, orthodoxy being right belief, orthopraxy being correct actions, and more of a sort of having the correct cultural framework, following what your culture tells you. Orthopathy is basically gnosis, correct gnosis, having the correct experiences.
I would argue that I personally feel a strong pull to right action, because when I look at a belief system and I try it on for size and I see what it is, and then anymore I'm less that I want to try it on for size than I want to observe those who are in it, because I think I get a more genuine picture.
Sure.
When I experience how others in a faith practice, and I try to look at the fruits of it and
Sure.
try to take it from a pragmatic look. And I think that that's more shaping my own construct of, you know, the path I'm on. It's hard to find words for it. I'm constantly evolving my system as I'm supposed to do because of what I am, and I think that I like that better than the paradigm shifting. I don't think when I was trying that, which is, you know, the classic method, I don't think I was getting pure answers to the questions I had.
For those playing the home game, in Aberan's tradition, an occult form of tradition called chaos magic, there is something called paradigm shifting, which is basically going from various different belief systems using something called suspension of disbelief, which is the idea that you operate under the assumption that the belief is absolutely correct, objectively true, while you are practicing or performing rituals within that specific tradition, i.e., bouncing from traditional Wicca to Hellenismos to Rosicrucian, occultism, and going back and forth between those, and banishing that idea once you shift into something else, generally understood, also in sister traditions like Discordianism, with laughter. Basically laughing it off and switching over to something else. And to get to what you were saying, Aberan, I would say there's good reason for that, because ultimately paradigm shifting, even within chaos magic and other postmodern, post-thelemic forms of occultism, is really, it's just a method. It's just a means of contemplation, the same way that philosophy was for the ancient Greeks. But it should never be relied upon as the basis of path working, because ultimately you have no foundation. Ultimately, within your tradition, I would say, in my perspective, the ultimate goal of something like that is to create your own mosaic, is to eventually create your own paradigm, which hence makes it the exact opposite of a lot of other forms of occultism, which are very much rigidly adhering to the idea that specific formula are necessary for gnosis, whereas yours is more, as I've said, that's why I said it is orthopathic, because it focuses on the eventual result more so than it does on the specific mechanism.
And if you're interested and no one has anything against it, I want to share with you a discovery I made in forming that. I now have like a order of command kind of my beliefs, where I place as my patron matron, since it, in my views, it doesn't have a gender, chaos at the top, and then below that I pick my focus, which is Eris, and particularly the suffering aspects of Eris. And so that is the things I focus on. And then my example of who I follow, or I chose the word paragon, and I picked a fictitious character who I know is fictitious, but I use as my example of as a role model, more or less, is Shadow the Hedgehog. And currently, that's the system I'm working with.
Well, there is some historicity to what you're doing, especially in the concepts of spirit guides and familiars, but more particularly with the concept of thought forms, or what is often described in Tibetan religions as a tulpa.
Yes.
That's honestly what I think you're working with by effectively using something from popular culture, using memetics to construct something that you can focus on esoterically.
Right.
I would say that would be distinctly different from an egregore or a god form, and that is a collective thought form, egregore, and a deity, which is within your tradition something that is formed over various centuries and the collective belief of whole societies. But I do think it is still relevant and useful if you're able to have a certain degree of distance from it and have that appropriate level of suspension of disbelief. If you get too invested in the idea, then eventually you may unconsciously impart a certain sense of triviality to what you're doing. You end up just laughing yourself to death. You have to take it as just as a technique and take it with a grain of salt. That's my perspective.
I definitely have my focus, and these are my attractors. And that's why the names are there, and what I focus when I try to, put purpose within my life, and that's how I use those as a tool. And what was I going to say? I don't know where I was going after that, but definitely I like it. The shadow came about by a bunch of coincidences that I couldn't ignore, and I thought it was worth a chance at least. Take a few omens as omens and see how the dice land. Is what I'm going with on that one.
Absolutely. But I would personally recommend that whatever you do, catalog it. Have a journal. I think that everyone, regardless of what their particular path or religious tradition is, that they should have some kind of journals to put down their thoughts and ideas. It helps to keep that foundation strong and to allow you to have points of reference, to see where you're going, where you've evolved, where you've progressed, but also things that you may need to work on, or things that you may be lacking in, or you may be slipping down a slope into old habits again.
Right. And what I think I was going to say that is kind of important to put out there is I still, and this is the thing that sounds, like the atheist deconstruction, is when I say it, I'm fully aware that all of these things I said, all these beings that I identify by these names, are myself, and like you said, thought forms, that they come from within me and they're my inner desires, and I've given them shape so that I can relate to them. And I'm fully aware that that is most likely where they come from. But I'm also at a point that I don't entirely care that much. I very much enjoy what it does for me, and as a tool, it is very useful.
Oh, most definitely. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. So, I hope you don't feel we're ignoring you here. Just kind of an interesting little conversation going on. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to bring up?
I'm just glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you're all right, Ruben. When you don't show up, sometimes I worry.
I'd like to share the good gospel of Moses, our teacher.
Okay.
And I honestly, oh, sorry.
No, I was just joking.
Oh, I was going to say I'm pretty much at the end of what I got to say.
I thought I was waiting. I was actually waiting for the teachings of Moses, peace be upon him. But I had something very significant happen. Um, I'm really into geometric forms. I was reading a book called Symmetry, and how they're using mathematics, hence how they, in Islam, they couldn't make figures, but instead they made a lot of geometric patterns in order to express the divinity of God and the ongoing movement of what's going on. You see a pattern, and then from that pattern you see another pattern. It almost goes into infinity in a strange way. But I do have a prayer rug where it does have a lot of those things where I could actually focus on these things. But one of the things that was happening is that I always lived always viewed the world as interconnected. And that type of artwork, that type of expression of the divine was very significant. And something happened where I was driving and I decided not to eat meat anymore. I just said, I can't do it. So, regardless of what others may say about eating flesh in a sense, but I just felt something where it was not doing me any good anymore, and I stopped and have no desire. So that's one of, and this is the first time I ever said it to anyone. So I think, I just had to bring it out there, but I couldn't. I guess trying to I feel more of a connection with a lot of things around me now, and that's basically it. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, one of the things that just comes to mind, and it just keeps being reaffirmed by all the other things that you're attached to it, particularly your vow against eating meat. It sounds very much like Pythagoras. I mean, there's the sacred geometry, the staving off of meat, almost pure veganism to a certain extent, and the sort of interconnectedness. That particular word right there is a huge, huge buzzword for Pythagoras, and also later Neoplatonism. And as we've discussed before, Frank, there is an interesting interrelationship between Islam and later Greek philosophies, particularly Hellenistic philosophies. So I find that to be really fascinating. That is a conclusion that you've come to through your own experiences.
Well, definitely I feel much lighter. But at the same time, for the couple of days, I was very angry because knowing how animals were being treated, and I couldn't say anything till now. But it's an ongoing process. But we'll see where this leads to, and I'm hoping that, I could develop from here.
I think it's very interesting. Sorry, that that's kind of interwoven with your kind of you, at least in your mind, it's been woven into kind of the spiritual outlook. It's not like not to be offensive, but for you, it's not. It doesn't seem to be like a rational reasoning. It just kind of like it was like an outgrowth of something deeper. I think that's interesting. Like I myself, I'm a vegan 6 days of a week. I'm a vegetarian 1 day a week, and on holidays I'll eat meat, or fish, but only if I'm in the presence of killing the animal. And for me, it has nothing to do with, except for killing the animal, maybe, is nothing to do with a spiritual exercise. But it annoys me because I don't know if anybody's ever been around vegans or vegetarians a lot, but they are some of the worst, most annoying people out there. Like, they'll have like tattoos with big V's and stuff, and just like very obnoxious and snotty, kind of like an internet atheist in a lot of ways.
There usually are atheists, in my experience. EV people are usually atheists.
Just this self-righteousness. So like I never ever in public frame will ever say that I'm a vegan or a vegetarian for most of the time, just because it automatically has a stigmatism in a lot of people's mind, and rightfully so, because it's like a self-righteousness. So it's nice or interesting to see somebody that has a similar kind of worldview, but it's not about some kind of, I guess, external reasonings.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It's rare.
It is, but and though I personally am not vegan or vegetarian, I think that more people who do feel that way for spiritual reasons, as an extension of their religious beliefs, esoteric beliefs, or whatever the case may be, that at some point I'd like to see you guys speak up, because for the point of historical consistency, the vast majority of instances in which people became vegan or vegetarian or was a part of their culture, 90% of the time it was because of religious or philosophical affiliation. So, just saying.
I know several of my fellow Wiccans, because we were in a group when I was in college, but several of them had made the choice to no longer eat meat and become vegetarians, because they took a more literal phrasing of the Wiccan Creed, which says that and ye harm none, do what you will. So they took a more literal version of that they are, by consuming meat and things like that, that they are by proxy essentially harming the animal and such. So I knew a lot of them that then decided to become vegetarian or vegan in that regard.
Well, that's usually how it happens. Specific sects or specific mystery traditions make particular interpretations of core belief systems within the overarching religious tradition, and then offshoot, they become vegan or vegetarian by extension of how they've interpreted those core concepts.
And I take an even more literal interpretation of them not eating of flesh, and I just don't eat the skin of animals. It's really awkward when you're having fried chicken. People give you the weirdest look.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Did I already ask you again about your...
Anybody got a topic or anything? It's been a while since I've been in here.
And the other thing I don't eat is I don't eat other carnivores or omnivores, because I feel that they're closer to me than the herbivores. So that's another strangeness of my diet.
I'm
Carnivores
already
usually don't
restricted
taste
from
good.
gluten. I can't give anything else up.
No, it was weird because I was just driving and I wasn't thinking about, was it unhealthy, was it wrong or anything. I just said to myself, I need to stop. And this is a time where I was praying even more, but something just told me I just needed to stop and just move on. And that's how it felt like. It felt like I just needed to move on and just go somewhere. And it's just changing.
I would say that's exactly how I felt when I decided to not eat other meat eaters. It felt somewhere inside me that I was not to have that. That somehow they were closer to me and I felt more akin to them. And I don't know why I think that. It doesn't entirely make a whole lot of sense to me on a rational level, but I've done that now for about half my life, a good 16 years or so. So I know it's not nearly like giving up eating every animal, but it felt like what I was called to do.
Yeah, like Pav said, it was not really like a rational decision. It just happened. It's fascinating.
Well, speaking of kind of vows, I think it's important to realize that there are many different ones that different religious traditions would include, depending on what sect, depending on what cult, and they were all across the board. Some people would be celibate as an extension of their worship of, say, Hestia in ancient Greece. Many of the Eastern religions, obviously, we've seen have veganism or vegetarianism as a part of that. And generally, it's, like I said, specific to either certain sects or a particular time in your life. It's pretty common in some Hindu sects that when you get past a certain age in your life, that's actually when you take your vow that you stave off the consumption of meat as a sort of extension of your seeking out of higher wisdom and higher knowledge by keeping yourself clarified and uncontaminated by meat. But it's interesting, particularly with meat, when you look at Ayurvedic medicine and the reasons why a lot of Hindus don't eat meat. It's the view that the energetic quality of meat is much heavier, and it can be negativistic. It can be damaging to the body in excess. So effectively, part of the reason why so many of them do that, but they completely eliminate it, is to purify themselves energetically so that they can maximize their sort of spiritual health on that level.
I have a food-related question, actually, for Frank. So, like, at least I think most people know that Muslims don't eat swine, don't eat pork. I also like and like other animals too, like dogs and stuff, right?
Correct. Yes.
And is it true that Shia also don't eat shrimp or like shellfish? Have you heard that?
Yeah, you're not supposed to eat shellfish. Anything
Okay.
that doesn't. Yeah.
So, but my question was less related about that, but more, is there a reasoning given, or is there like hypotheses as to why those, like, why some foods would be not considered? Like, what is the justification behind it? Like, has there been like a proper explanation for it?
There's two explanations. There's the exoteric one that I believe, and there's the esoteric one. Basically, it was forbidden because it could be health reasons, given the fact that how many times it will be very dangerous in that sense of eating, especially out in the desert, eating pork. Definitely it had a lot of connotation with diseases, but there was something else in the sense that there's a saying from the Prophet that said, "Don't let your stomachs become like graveyards." And sometimes a restriction will help a person to eat less heavy things like meat, because there's also a saying that the meat is actually the wine of the believer, meaning is the intoxicant. So the less meat, the better. And that's one explanation, an esoteric explanation that I heard. It was forbidden since the time of Abraham, and that's something that is traditionally done, but the esoteric meaning is basically just trying to eat less meat as possible. Because definitely if you start eating more and more, you're not going to be praying as much. You're going to feel kind of heavy, like Kevin was saying, and definitely has its benefits to eat less meat than eat more, and also kindness to animals and things of that nature. So there's a lot of explanations, but I don't know if there's one single explanation, if somebody could explain it.
Nice, thanks for that.
Um,
As for you're not supposed to eat shellfish, it's mostly shrimp and crab, and it's considered makruh, not haram. It's safer than sorry, is the other way to say it. But if you're Shia, it's totally different from what Sunnis think. Because they don't eat catfish, even though the Sunnis eat catfish. But, you know, they don't have scales. So I don't know about them.
yeah, I think bottom feeders and things like the Shiites are more. You're right. They're more stricter when it comes to dietary laws. Sufis, we do too. Like doing retreats, a lot of Sufi orders don't eat meat during that time. It's discouraged. So, but yeah, you're right.
I forgot what I was going to say. Damn. I blame you, Frank. It's all your fault.
Me? What did I do?
You distracted me from my hardcore typing. I'll just go back to typing.
Typing? Oh, okay. No, I want people to talk, man. I don't want to be talking. I've been more quieter for the past couple of days.
What's your so you can't eat animal flesh, so do you still eat animal products? What would your take now be on eggs and dairy?
I prefer not to eat it. No, that's just my thing. I prefer not to eat it, and I've been eating less and less of it through time. But
yeah, I was just wondering because that's like, you know, that's a gray area for a lot of people, and some people are totally fine with it. And, you know, so
yeah,
I want to see where you stand.
Yeah, no, I won't. I won't eat it.
See, I personally eat butter straight off the stick, so I admire your ability to restrain your diet in such ways.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel better, and sometimes, a lot of times, when there's restrictions placed, especially like I remember reading art history and how back then the Catholics couldn't use certain types of colors on their paintings, but with that restriction actually came like a really beautiful form of art. So I think restrictions sometimes brings out a lot of creativity. One case in point, El Greco, one of those painters, the symmetry of a lot of Islamic art, some beautiful stuff came from there. So I think with restrictions comes a certain type of creativity.
Without restriction, I would argue that creativity is almost unnecessary. Well, not creativity necessarily, but imagination. You have to be flexible when your resources are limited.
Yes.
And yes, I completely agree with that. And I would say that it's the most true for those who deal with poverty. I think those people have to get extremely cunning just to live.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. Like one of the best events in history is when people are limited of what they could do, because of the circumstances that then something beautiful comes out. So, yeah, there's so many examples I could point out, but one particular one that actually sticks out is an artist called Matisse, Henry Matisse. Of every time he came with an illness, like where he couldn't, let's say for example, use his hands, he used other ways to actually create stuff, and his work got better every time he got sick. It's insane. Every time he got sick or some type of ailment, his art went up to another level. Actually, one of his works with this church that he did in southern France, when I seen the church, I actually almost started weeping. Like literally, like tears was coming out of my eyes because I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. And this is towards the end of his life.
I recently finished a book on the wreck of the Medusa, which was a French painting. And the guy who did it, I mean, it was a terrible story. It was just a haphazard wreck. They ended up in the middle of the ocean, right off the, well, not really the middle of the ocean, actually right off the coast of, they were on their way to, oh gosh, it was one of the city-states in Africa that was owned by the British, and then the French, and then the British again. Started with an S. I forget. But anyway, there was cannibalism and things like that, and the guy who did the painting actually went to graveyards to get like limbs off of dead corpses. Like he went to hospitals and got things to like just surround himself with the grossness of death and the struggle, and try and at least live through the struggle that was there, and that in order to do his painting. And it became one of the biggest paintings of like the late 1700s. It was amazing. I was shocked. But I mean, it's just what you're saying, you know, that sort of struggle. Trying to think about how people survive through just terrible, terrible traumas, and then trying to put that together in art.
Guy's got issues.
Those are some of the most imaginative people, too, those with issues.
Yeah, for being crazy and having issues. High five, anyone. High five.
Well, the famous Carl Jung says, find me a normal person and I will cure him.
I try my hardest to do so. I find it's a lot more difficult than he made it out to be.
I just have a thing with dead bodies. When I watch those Hollywood movies and she's like dead and he's all crying, I love you, and gives her a kiss, I'm like, you know, to disembody the dead, just, you know, leave it there. Let it go away.
That escalated quickly.
Oh, I could take it further, but I'm not going to. Just for your sake.
Went from crazy to dismemberment and dead bodies. It's quite a transfer there.
I thought he was having to surround himself with bits of the dead to become inspired. Isn't that what? Did I hear that wrong? Okay, I'll just shut up.
No, that was right.
Basically it.
I mean, what's interesting about the painting is how politicized it became, because it was sort of the whole wreck became a symbol of the insufficiency of the new Bourbon monarchy, which replaced Napoleon after the French Revolution happened and everything else, and the transfer of power and everything. The captains who were loyal to the crown from before the French Revolution or the seamen, who the guy who captained the ship were promoted to high positions when the royals took over again, and said, oh, I was royal all the time, and so they got these commissions that they weren't qualified for, and then this disaster happens. And what's really interesting is the survivors were treated better by the British than their own countrymen, which, there's a lot of opinions about how French culture and how French people treat each other, but I'm not going to go there.
I would like to state for the record that I have yet to surround myself with the remains of dead individuals to seek inspiration.
Was
Duly noted.
So is it a dead men's party? Nothing.
Is that a reference to something?
Yeah, Dead Man's Party, song from the 80s.
Oh.
I was in single digits back then.
Yeah, so was I. No excuse.
Maybe I was more sheltered than you. I don't know what I got.
You sheltered? What the hell?
I didn't even exist, so there's that.
Oh. We have a young one here.
Mm-hmm.
Just 1990, just early 90s.
It's okay.
Sarah, can I ask you a question, my lady?
Yeah, absolutely.
What does it mean to be a witch?
Well, I do want to point out one thing.
Point out all of it. Go for it.
You can be Wiccan and not identify as a witch.
Okay.
For me personally, I do. In part, the main, difference that I have found, and there are so many, different, sections of Wicca itself. So you have those that are, believe within the, the Maiden Mother Crone. You have, just a whole plethora of different kinds of Wicca. For me personally, I do a lot of rituals. So with the 12 Sabbats, so I celebrate the equinoxes. I celebrate Halloween, Samhain, different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I do a lot of work with tarot, with just going to the ancestors and stuff like that. And then as far as, just the different, gods or goddesses that I believe in, I believe that there are two primary. So you have the god and the goddess, and they together created the world. They created the universe. And then from there, there are other gods that do exist, whatever the case may be,
right.
Be it the Greek gods, Norse gods, whatever. But they all kind of are still in tune with, the god and the goddess.
All the girls that I've known in the Wicca, girls, I say girls, I favored the Mother Maiden Crone, but they were like monotheist or pantheist kind of. They would talk more of like Odin and Freya, like this in the land, the marriage of the two or something. I don't remember how they put it. Anyway, they were like heavy in the Mother Maiden Crone thing, which is I never really thought of it. I'd never really. I think women are actually spiritually elevated than men anyway, so it's fascinating stuff.
Woo!
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I have to agree with that one, that's for sure.
I agree with that one too.
What's that?
I don't. I would say different, but I wouldn't say elevated.
I think, I don't know, being able to bring life into the world, I think, would notch up on me. So
They got their goodies on the inside too. I mean, even physically.
That is a superior tactic.
Smart.
All I can think of right now is Betty White. You know,
Well,
don't. I don't know how appropriate it is to say, but don't grow some balls, grow a vagina, because those things can take a beating.
I don't know, have you been kicked in the box?
that is what she said.
The box? Fucking
It's
hurt.
an actual quote. It's an actual quote, I promise.
It is. It's legit.
I gotta tell my wife that. She just had a baby. She's gonna love that. Then she'll be telling me to man up in a whole different meaning, and I can't do that.
I do see men as a mutation of women. I do see them as the original gender. So I'll give you that.
That's why men got nipples, right? It's like we start out as female or something like that. J-Dub's left.
James, how is daughter?
Growing like a weed. Like she, maybe it's my own perception. I don't know. We haven't weighed her or anything, but it's almost like she's twofold what she was 3 weeks ago. But she's healthy and happy, and little sister loves her more every day, or the big sister, excuse me, loves her more every day. So that's a beautiful thing. Thanks for asking.
Baruch Hashem.
Amen. Baruch Hashem.
And the another thing about women that they got going for them that they always think is a curse is they're more energy efficient.
They are?
We're energy efficient?
You take less calories to maintain life per body weight, which means you can't eat as much and you'll gain weight faster is the other end of that.
You're a more efficient creature. Huh.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's very interesting.
It's about 10%. A woman of a roughly equal weight to a man can only needs 90% as much food.
See, in here, I was just going with the fact that I was just short, but, you know, if I can be both space efficient and energy efficient, then that'd just be great.
Do you fit in the overhead compartment?
I can fit in a suitcase. I actually have picture proof that I can fit in a suitcase.
So, you're ergonomic?
Yes. Absolutely.
Sounds like it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's funny story. Talking about suitcases and crazy crap. When I was in middle school, there was this kid who was like really, really short, and he stayed to be pretty short even when he got into high school. And we dared him to step into one of the sousaphone cases, which is basically the large tube as they go around your body. And we put him in the suitcase and kicked it around. He was a good sport. It was pretty bad. And the teacher found out. He got a little pissed. It was funny. He was like 5'2", something like that. I don't know, but it was funny.
That's about my height.
Oh, my little sister's short. She's like, if I was 5'2", I'd be tall. She's like 5 foot.
She's not the dwarf. What is the cutoff anyway?
410, I think.
4.8? Oh, 4.10? I think it's 4.8 in Canada.
You know the Dutch are like the tallest people in the world?
The Dutch?
On average, how tall?
I think 6'2", 6'3" for males.
I'm part Dutch. Where did that go?
Funny thing, I'm actually like, diluted Dutch, but on my mother's side, or my father's side it is, my father's mother's side is English Dutch. All the women on that side, despite that fact, they are all below 5'5". All the women are short, and all the guys are above 6 feet. Weird.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have some Dutch blood myself, and everyone on that side of the family is really short. The height in my family comes from the Irish side, actually. Which is strange.
And I was about to congratulate Sarah for overcoming the odds.
Ridiculous.
I did tell my boss at work that the thing I enjoy the most about the internet is people laugh at my jokes.
So they don't they don't laugh at them in public? What is that?
Oh, that wasn't a joke?
No, that works. Most everything I say is a joke. If you take me very serious, then you're doing it wrong. No, like at work, I try to be humorous. It just doesn't work. I actually like the whole area I'm in. It's my humor just doesn't mesh. But the next thing I said after that is, but on the internet, I have found a surprisingly large amount of British people. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Very dry sense of humor.
Yeah.
That's what they accuse me of.
They don't have a dry sense of humor. They just have a different style of sense of humor.
The British sense of humor, especially now, is absurdist. They like really absurd humor. Like if you're in for a little treat, you should watch The Mighty Boosh. That show is like an acid trip. It is weird. It's just weird. Watch the episode if you want to you find a clip of it. Old Greg.
Oh, God.
Yes. That is British humor.
I'm old Greg.
I'm old Greg. What are you doing in these waters?
I love British humor. I watch Keeping Up Appearances, and as time goes by, I recently saw the film on Netflix. They have the Johnny English Reborn.
Oh God!
Absolutely ridiculous.
There's something,
but in the typical British sort of way.
I think we Americans just like watching British people make fools of themselves. I don't know.
I'm okay with that.
Canadians.
Hey, the Queen's British, so watch out.
Oh yeah.
Gotta watch your mouths over here.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I am a huge Doctor Who fan. Huge Doctor Who fan. I grew up watching a lot of Python.
Ah, Python.
I love Python.
You know, Brits do good TV. They do good heroes too. You ever notice that? They do really great heroes. I mean, Robin Hood. That's not. I mean, he's legendized, but Sherlock Holmes. You know, James Bond. They write some really cool heroes. Brits do.
James. A fish, a fish, a fish. Ooh.
Where did it go? Oh, fishy, 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 fish. My wife's in the other room. She goes, "Your dad's weird." He started off a Python skit, and I kind of kept going.
I'm mildly convinced that because I saw Python so young as a child, that it's why I became a witch. Because I weigh the same as a duck.
You heard it here. If you don't want your kids to grow up and to become witches, you gotta keep on the Python.
Between that and Hocus Pocus, I was screwed.
God, Hocus Pocus.
Now, there's a movie I watched, not the new one, but the old one, The Wicker Man. How accurate is that movie? Was that just like something they just made up, or they actually got certain rituals?
Drugs.
Oh, drugs?
That's just that movie. That's the time. That's just drugs.
That's just drugs.
There's no like anything to it. Don't even analyze it. It's just drugs.
I saw that movie, it freaked me out. I was like, what the hell is this? And no, not the new one. I have not seen the new one. I've seen the old one. Yeah, the one in the 70s. Yeah.
There has not been a single movie about paganism, polytheism, or witchcraft, at least contemporary, that it is all accurate.
No.
It's all Hollywood.
Yeah, but to be fair, a lot is unknown. Like, there's blanks that you got to fill in with most traditions. Yeah. Well, a little less with yours, because yours has been preserved a lot better than the other ones. But you know,
because the Greeks couldn't shut up.
The Greeks wrote stuff down. That really helped.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Frank, I mean, there's a lot of people who have written stuff down for Wicca. It's just that every Wiccan there is no authoritative structure, so you can really just go with whatever teacher that you like, as opposed to having, you don't have, one teacher whose authority is taken, and then, there's a debate between, two different, for lack of a better term, Wiccan philosophers. I mean, there's certainly dialogue, but there isn't any hierarchical structure. And
that's not true.
There's a lot more than I got. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. Traditional Wicca, coven-based initiatory Wicca, is very hierarchical.
Yeah.
Neo-Wicca, solitary eclectic neo-pagan Wicca, which is like most of the Wiccans you'll see, especially under 18, that's not Wicca. That just looks like Wicca. Just saying.
Oh, I know. And what I mean to say, though, is that your ideas are tell you more about your own coven than they do about, a well-established, there is a very tenuous relationship of Catholicity with Wiccan ideas.
Well, it's modern. It's a modern religion. So it hasn't been around all that long. Less than 100 years.
Well, I mean, that shouldn't matter too much. I mean, like, for instance, I'm a Reformed Christian, and there's this idea of Reformed Catholicity in that, within the Reformed creeds and confessions of the Church, there is, a universal understanding that ought to be held. Most people will point to the Westminster Standards. But there isn't anything like that within Wicca, and I mean the Westminster Standards have been in place, albeit since like the 1600s, but still.
Well, you see, there's this thing. You see, there's this thing called preservation. Christians have it. Everyone else doesn't. So they're working from a foundation that's not as solid.
And I would have you go back and look at the Christianity when it was the age that Wicca is right now, and how put together it was then.
Yeah, the first century of early Christianity. You mean Christianities? Many Christianities.
Christianities.
Yeah. Dozens of Christians. Dozens of Christianities.
Well, isn't there something universal that's consistent with Wicca? Like a standard, like the star? Well, I shouldn't say star, but that pentagram?
The pentacle.
The pentacle, yes. The pentacle. Now, is that something that's universally accepted within Wicca communities?
Generally speaking, yes, though there are variations. A few traditions use a pentacle that looks more like a flower. Some actually use a pentacle that has a pearl in the center. There are small little variations, but yes, generally that's the well-accepted Wiccan symbol, largely because it allows them to have that. They're one of the few neo-pagan or alternative religious traditions that actually have some sort of recognition in America as a standard religion.
Now, with the pentacle, now the meaning is universal or is different for everyone?
The general meaning behind the Wiccan pentacle is of the 5 elements. The top being spirit, and then depending on the tradition, the other 4 are a certain configuration of the 4 classical elements. But obviously the pentagram, at least in the West, has a history that predates its usage by Wiccans, particularly in use of esoteric traditions and earlier philosophical traditions in Greek religion. But it was also used by very early Christians for the 5 wounds of Christ, though without the circle around it.
That's what makes it a gram, the circle around it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, what does the circle symbolize?
Unity.
Unity.
Yeah.
Or a closed system sometimes. Depends on how you're applying it.
Largely, the inclusion of a circle around a pentacle, depending on the tradition, whether we're talking about Wicca or various forms of occultism, ceremonial magic, and the like, is to designate it as a sort of glyph or sigil representing the center of a magic circle. Casting spells, things to that effect. Hence why it has that shape. And in many traditions, an actual pentacle, whether made out of metal or etched or drawn or represented in some manner within a particular ritual, is used in a similar fashion. Oh yeah, that's also true, Aberrn. There are many different analogs to the pentacle using different amounts of points. There's obviously the pentacle. There's hexagrams. There's a unicursal hexagram, which is used by Thelema. There's a 7-pointed star, which is used by various different traditions. 8 is used by any number of traditions, and then above that it gets really complicated and weird. There's actually a 13-pointed star that's often used.
Above that, it's getting a little crowded.
Just a little difficult to draw. Just saying.
Well, I know that they have there's, certain occultic traditions. Every point has a meaning. Like 5 points is power, 7 points is order, 8 points is disorder, things like that. I don't know them off the top of my head. But, yeah.
It depends on the tradition, but generally speaking, the number of points used in these sorts of symbols is generally understood through the lens of numerology, and it is sort of cross-cultural, cross-mythological, what certain numbers have meant, but ultimately it's within the bias of a Western mind, because different cultures had different views. In Asia, I mean, the 3 and 4 number have a much different connotation than they do here in the West. Some of them are considered horribly unlucky.
Well, yeah, I'm aware of a song that was written just to justify the number 4. It's a Japanese song, and about how it's not as bad as people make it out to be. And that's the whole theme of the entire song.
8 is really, really, really popular in China. It's considered a very, very lucky number, one that attracts wealth.
So I need to do what American did and go over to China?
I don't know. Don't ask me. You're ridiculous, Ruben. Causing all kinds of mischief.
Who or what is Pedo Bear?
Oh, you poor, poor man.
Sheltered soul.
Yeah.
Kevin,
What's up?
you reminded me. I used to live a few years ago up north. Doesn't really matter, but I used to live in a different place, and it was like right on the cusp of a Chinese neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Building this like crazy condo complex, like hundreds of millions of dollars, and I finally got to go in one, and it was missing floor 4 and floor 14, but it had floor 13. It was on top of this Chinese neighborhood, so they took out the floor number.
That's really common.
I just remembered that.
Well, that's really common. Some places will, in East Asia will have a 13th floor, but they don't name it the 13th floor. On the elevator, they'll completely omit that number. I don't even want to use the word they describe for phobia of 13. I can't even pronounce it. It's horrible. It's Triska Deca something phobia.
Is that still a thing in modern buildings? Do they still not use floor 13? Has that changed?
Some buildings, yes, I guess, but I don't think it's.
It would have like stopped by now. Like people would see it as like superstitious because everybody's so rational.
Someone will hold on to it forever. There'll be a group of people who will hold on to these things forever. I'm
Well, it's
almost.
kind of like an aesthetic thing, maybe too.
Yeah, maybe it's at the point now that it's just tradition. Which, to me, is a good enough reason to end it.
Well, the specific associations, at least here in the West with 13, have a lot to do with the Knights Templar and when they were killed. Also, it has to do, in some respects, to earlier Christian folklore, and it can actually get kind of complicated, but there's a lot of reasons behind it. I mean, think about how we've sort of relegated time. There's 12 months in a year. There's 12 hours on a clock face. You know, we could very well have 13 months in our year, but we don't. We have 12.
So in order for us to stop from using an extra number, they make that number bad luck. Almost forbidden in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why I'm bad luck.
Well, that's why we tell our kids not to go over there, or a monster will get you, or something like that. So, same concept of how authority figures maybe, we'll say, some sort of superstition to prevent you from applying it.
Or use it to instill fear.
Oh, that's what we say. There's a monster under your bed. Don't do that. Or,
That's what nightmare creatures are for.
I was actually kind of interesting. A day or so ago, I was found an article that was talking about Japanese folklore, and it was describing a figure called the Baku. it's a particular creature in Japanese folklore associated with dreams. And it's actually a sort of protector, but it's interesting how it works. In Japanese tradition, you would call the Baku to eat your dreams. So like if you were having nightmares, you would call upon the Baku to eat your nightmares. The thing is, though, if the Baku is really hungry, it'll eat all your dreams. So you won't have good dreams and you won't have bad dreams either, but it will take away all your hopes and dreams. So I guess the sort of thing that they're trying to impart to their children is, deal with most of your dreams. You can wish to the Baku to take away your nightmares, but don't do it all the time. I guess they're trying to instill the idea of sort of like you should be able to deal with most of your problems without having to go on this through this backup. I think it's kind of interesting when you think about it.
It's very practical in a way. It's weird.
Well, it's the Japanese for you.
Something I find odd that I don't know if it's all of Western culture, but definitely in my own experience growing up, it's how we tell stories to our children of heroes and great legends, and we give them these things to idolize, for lack of a better term. And then when you grow up, you're pretty much told to throw those dreams away and, just fall in line. And that conversion, that disjunct for me was just huge. And I don't even know if I've gotten over it yet. I still have these delusions of herodom.
It's kind of weird in the way. It's like, maybe it's like preparation in a sense. Like, all right, now you're off to fight your own battles. So.
But you're told about those who fought battles and how that's great and to do that. And then I feel once you get into your late teens and into your and you start to leave your family, and then in the very early times of your independence, you're pretty much told to not fight at all. Like, to stand up is oppressed, I feel.
Human beings are a little paradoxes, because in the same breath as sort of trying to impart this hopeful sense of imagination, we're also telling them, shit sucks. And it's largely because we have these conflicting impulses. Some impulses telling us that there's opportunities for us to succeed and be able to seek out our own dreams, even as adults and even in middle age. But we also have plenty of impulses telling us the exact opposite. So we end up sort of giving these mixed messages to children and adolescents as a result of it.
That's why I like Shadow. He's not very conflicted on much of anything.
Well, it's funny you mentioned.
Where he stands.
Yeah, I gotcha. But it's funny that he's called Shadow when you look at, that video game figure. When you look at Jungian archetypes with how the shadow is actually sort of represented, because the shadow self is one of the most difficult things to confront in Jungian thought. So largely because it's so raw and so honest in some respects, but often sometimes very dark and scary at the same time.
Kevin, how do you relate to that theory?
How do I relate to Jungian archetypalism?
Yeah, do you accept it or reject it?
I like it from the perspective of how it is useful as a psychological tool. But I have a very sort of... I fucking hate it, or at least how it's been used. I think it's been appropriated far too much, particularly in its application to classical mythologies. People are very, very quick to use Carl Jung in application to mythology to say that everything is an archetype, which I think just sort of nerfs pagan mythologies. It strips them of any of their sort of cultural meanings and makes them into these sort of comic book characters. So I generally don't like it. In its original form, I can appreciate it, but not how it's been used.
Yeah, but by design it generalizes and it doesn't really take into account nuances. And if you're making a discussion of those things outside of the generalization, it's not very useful. And I think that you'd be going at it a different way if you're trying to express specific cultural meanings of your mythology or legend.
It's to be used to describe psychology and sociological functions, but not as a legitimate tool to study mythology. It does reference mythology as a methodology to describe social functioning and the way the mind works, and as point of reference. But the way it's been applied, the sort of neo-Jungianism that you see now, has nothing to do with what Carl Jung was actually doing in the first place. Most people did just take a very basic understanding of Carl Jung from some of his earlier works, and that's it. They don't go into anything further than that. They don't actually explain. They don't actually study his whole the whole breadth of his work, because there's whole other things that Carl Jung was invested in that most people who are just like fans or fanboys, fangirls of Carl Jung don't even fucking know about. They don't care to know about.
I still think it could be a starting point, though. But yeah, it is a generalization. It's just not. It's rigid, not very flexible.
It's a starting point. Yeah, it's a starting point in the way that 1 month old cheddar is a starting point to get to brie or camembert. You know, it's it's super fucking basic when you approach it from that perspective, especially outside of its context. But I can kind of appreciate it because there is a solid application, particularly within psychology. There are hybrid forms of psychotherapy that utilize Carl Jung for that purpose. So I don't think it's completely bad. What I do dislike, in the sort of same vein, is Joseph Campbell. I think Joseph Campbell is highly overrated. And he's very, very...
I don't even know who that is, so...
I know exactly what you mean, Joseph Campbell. I took a mythology class, and he does exactly what you described. I was looking for his name because I slipped it, but then you mentioned it, and I was just... I felt exactly the same way. He really he focuses so much on Jung that you lose the content of the mythology itself.
I actually feel that neo-Jungians are not Jungians. They're just Campbellians. They're Campbellian fanboys.
Well, yeah, and to be honest, they're just plain old deconstructionists.
Yes.
They attempt to use analytical theory to destroy ideas without giving you anything to put them back together again. And that's just an altogether unhelpful way of being academic, I think, and being a scholar. I think it's important to recognize the fragility of one's own ideas, but at the same time, that doesn't say, you don't go and say, well, then that's that. That's what happens.
Absolutely.
One of the things you're talking about, the shadow, I remember going through the Star Wars, the Clone Wars animated series, and the very end of the animated series, I just could not stand. It was Yoda fighting his evil shadow, and the whole point of the ending of the story was that, you know, Yoda fought his worst enemy himself, and now is able to do all the great things. And it was just, to me, it seemed to be so strange, because it's like, all right, so, you know, if you do enough works, you know, you can gain your own salvation. And it's just, that's just not true. I mean, if you are, and you know, seriously, and you know, struggle, you need an outside force to influence you, to help you get over, you know, the fears. You know, you need encouragement. You need, you know, something. You know, I just, you know, just you know, go into your corner, think about stuff for a while, wrestle with the shadow, and you'll come out on top. I don't buy that.
I got just a quick thing to say. I find it kind of amusing how like often your shadow self is the worst of you, and the thing I refer to as shadow for me, I feel is embodying the best of me. And I just found that a little amusing.
Well, the shadow is neither. The way
Right.
that the shadow is generally described are things about yourself that are primal. So that could be good, that could be bad, that could be neutral, but ultimately they are unactualized elements of self that are deeply ingrained, that are underneath it all, that are unconscious or subconscious, but not necessarily bad. That hypersimplification that Jonathan just described is a perfect example of what most people think of when they think of the shadow. They think of the shadow version of Link from Zelda.
And the worst part is, I mean, these are the kind of values that, kids watch that and they think about, and then they go off from that, and then they're given a false viewpoint of reality, and I just don't think that's helpful.
Thing is, kids are stupid. They
Well,
are.
Oh, I know.
I don't think that
They know better.
I don't think that either is like wrong. It's just that if you were to take something as a model and you're saying this is what a shadow self is, and then someone else is using it to illustrate something else, then you have that communication problem, because especially if you're not the kind of person that's willing to take something that they hold near and dear to them and accept that someone else uses that word in a different way for something they hold near and dear to themselves. I think that's the only time you're going to get a problem. I think, whatever works for you.
For sure. Welcome, Dusty. Did you have something you needed to say?
No, not really something I needed to say. I just wanted to step in and see what you guys were doing.
Okay. Just double checking. Didn't want you to feel like you were being left out.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm pretty lost as fuck. I need you to fill me in.
Welcome to Interfaith.
I know, right?
It's all across the board. This group generally, kind of shoots at the hip.
I like that kind of stuff.
Conversation usually develops organically, whoever brings something up, and it can go off into la-la land sometimes. We can go into very different aspects and tangential, to use that.
I like going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that is where my mind resides.
The rabbit hole.
Sounds like a name of something, maybe a restaurant, perhaps. The rabbit hole.
The rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's I can't remember what it's called. I was starting to think of in Japan they have a really famous restaurant that's Wonderland themed, and I can't remember what it's called.
Really?
Yeah.
You guys were mentioning something a while ago about pseudopsychology. What was all that about? I know that you mentioned Carl Jung.
I was actually referencing, well, we all were, but me in particular, because I have a certain distaste for it. I have a distaste for how Carl Jung, and particularly a Joseph Campbell application of Carl Jung, is used by people, specifically to relegate belief systems, mythologies, and takes it far out of its original context, which is largely as a vessel of psychology. I'm okay with it being used for psychology, and it has been used fairly effectively and successfully in therapy.
Right.
But so many people use Carl Jung as a go-to to describe beliefs, philosophies, mythologies, to make themselves appear to be more interesting or more well-versed in the subject as a sort of shortcut, instead of actually getting down to the nitty-gritty, looking at the language, looking at culturally specific contexts and why the interpretations were the way they were, and the detail that's actually involved. why they're different, why Greek mythology is different than Norse mythology, why Sumerian mythology is different than Egyptian mythology, all these sorts of things. And people don't go through the time because they're fucking lazy. I feel that most people who rely entirely on Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell in these sorts of discussions are lazy fucks.
I think the way you just said it was a lot clearer and a lot more concise than the way you tried to say it before. But I more understand what you were getting at now.
Well, you know, I'm pedantic, Abram, so you know.
I get called that.
Pedantic. Pedantic and semantic. They're used quite frequently in Congress with one another.
Pedantic is one of my favorite words.
Yes. Is it because it has pedo in it? I'm kidding.
No.
Okay.
No.
Isn't it like peda, though?
Yeah, it's peda. It's a different...
Yeah, I think it's got an A.
It's a word joke. Relax.
Not a very good one.
We'll find that. Welcome, Ermine.
Thank you. Be right back.
Okay.
I love it when you welcome someone and then they're like, I'll be right back.
Talk to me.
No, it's just that you finally get around to acknowledging that someone showed up and then they're like, about that, I gotta go do something real quick.
Yes. That's the way it works, man. Why you gotta be so judgmental, Abram?
I'm not being judgmental. I'm just finding the situation to be amusing.
Yes, so amusing. Indeed. That's true. It does happen quite a bit.
I also have noticed something that when I talk to you, Kevin, I talk a lot faster than when I talk when there's other people or there's more people talking.
Because you got to keep up, man.
I think it's because I think you can keep up, and with everybody else. And I also find in a lot of the Google Hangouts when I'm discussing things about my own thoughts that I repeat things a lot, and I really go over points over and over because I have this feeling like there's no way they can get it, but I gotta try. So I don't know.
I find that a good buffer for that is to use analogies.
Yeah, I don't know. Like when I was in college, I didn't do that at all because I was taught not to. And then I got out into the real world, and I found I had to do that with almost everyone I met. And I also had to talk slower. So, definite learning experience.
Definitely.
I know I've met people when I'm trying to explain something to them, and they literally tell me, teach it to me as if you were teaching it to a child.
Try to have that happen a lot.
And I'm like, you should think better of yourself. You should be beyond this point. I should be able to teach it to you like you're an adult. I don't. It's hard for me to do. I can't look at an adult and then think, okay, I'm going to teach this to them as a child. Because I wouldn't even teach a child the way that I'm told to teach a child. I try to make them grow up fast to think like an adult, you know?
There's actually a concept within child development that talking down to children, not just talking with baby talk, but also talking down to them, using as simple language as you possibly can, is not doing children any favors because it's not encouraging them to develop and to challenge themselves intellectually or developmentally. So,
yeah, you get these adults that need to be taught like children.
Because that's all they've been done. That's all that's been done to them. It's funny, there was this girl who was in marching band with me. She was one of the flag girls. She had a really bad speech impediment, And apparently she had sat down and talked to me. Largely the reason that she had that, and she was in speech therapy for a number of years, is her parents didn't correct her. They baby talked to her, and they talked to her almost sort of in a condescending manner. So by the time she got to be, in middle school, it was a really big issue. So she ended up having to go into speech therapy because they thought it was cute.
They do say, though, that there are studies for very, very early on when a child is trying to learn how to say things, to have that emphasis that you get with a certain baby talk is actually helpful very early on. But you're right. You need to get them to the point where you are using normal language. You cannot continue it. But yeah, very, very early on, it actually does help. It's sort of like when you're learning a new language, and you need to be walked through pronunciation, through emphasizing different parts of words. It's that sort of thing. But I mean, it's only for very early development. It's like there's other learning strategies like that help. It's like song singing. If you can learn the ideas through song, it's also very helpful, as opposed to just rote saying.
Well, what I've studied on the subject, it's not actual baby talk that is recommended for the first 5 years. It's actually very clear, slow, and at a higher timbre. You speak to them in a slightly higher pitch.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that is actually responding to better. So when I would talk to a child, if I was asked them, would you like to go get a drink of water, I'd say, would you like to go get a drink of water? They respond to that more developmentally.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, obviously not just like smushing your words around.
Yeah.
But
because that's what they need. They need the speech to be above ambient noise so that they can start to locate that. Early on, your senses are very vague. Your sense of sight, smell, and sound and all that are very vague. So you want to portray to the child a certain degree of delineation so that they can start making those connections.
Exactly.
But if you muddy it too much with baby talk, then they're never going to get that. And then they'll end up having a lot of concentration issues even early on in grade school.
I think
test lower.
Yeah. I think what I was reading was actually endorsing what you're saying, but it defined baby talk in a way that it was that, timbre.
It's also a sense of positivity. You want to be very optimistic in your speech, playful, engaging. Look the child in the eye, give them all those sorts of context. If you look at a lot of early childhood cartoons that they have, the educational type programs, almost all of the characters in the show are facing the audience in the same way of a puppet show. And puppet shows were done for centuries as entertainment for children. And there's a reason for that, because it's engaging the children. It's drawing their attention in. And all of the characters speak in that sort of speech. So how do we solve this? That kind of thing. Because it's getting the children involved and getting their attention above all the other sort of ambient noises.
Yeah. And that's why, like, when Teletubbies came out, it was such a travesty for educational entertainment for kids.
Well, I find that the good balance is between, say, a Teletubbies and a Barney, which almost seems to ignore the children in comparison, and that balance is done very well and has been done very well, despite some of the weird reforms they've done to it with Sesame Street. Sesame Street engages the children, speaks in that sort of manner, but has a variety of different things that they do. It doesn't condescend children. There are a lot of cartoons that I've seen of late that sort of do that, and some of them actually teach some rather confusing things. I actually remember watching this program. I think it was on the Disney Channel. It might have actually been on Nick. Doc McStuffins. Okay, this little girl. She's a little black girl. Her mother is a doctor, and I think her dad's like a lawyer, or they're both fairly successful. And the whole basis of this story is that this girl pretends to be a doctor, and she sort of has patients that are her toys. But so often in the story, she basically does that and avoids human contact. And there's this sort of, I guess you could say, undertone that there's a kind of sort of relationship between the mother and father that almost like it could be a divorce relationship, and that this child is using this pretend world as a surrogate for interaction. I watched a good number of episodes because I helped to babysit my buddy's niece.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a depressing show. This is a really depressing show. This is a kid who has no interaction with anyone else.
Yeah.
No friends. And that's a kid's program for toddlers.
I know. I'm sort of afraid. Like, I don't want to be that controlling parent that has to, like, watch everything their kids watch. But at the same time, there is so much garbage out there. And it's just...
Classics, dude. Classics.
Yeah, classics. Exactly.
Go with the stuff that is... Okay, let's put it this way. If it's appropriate for children, but something you can also watch and enjoy, that's what you want to show your children.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because you want to give them layer and subtext, things that they can look at and actually have a good time with. Dark Crystal, The Labyrinth. I mean, some of these old, like, animated, practical effects, kids, things that are really easy to sort of engage them. Those are good ones. And obviously there are classic cartoons, depending on their age, obviously. There's stuff out there. You just gotta put a little more effort in. That's all.
Oh, I know. I mean, I have an idea of, like, some of the things, but...
And it also depends on their age group,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would love to get my kids into. There was a series that came out and went that was called Liberty's Kids, and it did a really good job of giving kids an introduction to the events of the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't very politicized either, which was really nice. It is very rare that you come across anything to do with the American Revolution that isn't highly politicized, especially in adult literature. So to have something like that for kids, I thought was amazing. And, there's a whole bunch of issues in terms of early childhood education and intermediate education to do with, the teaching of history, because history is not really valued in our culture or our society anymore.
No.
And that's not just a cynical idea. That's just the culture. We're really future focused, really technology focused. We're not so infatuated with the past as we used to be.
Which I think is a horrible shame. It's a horrible shame because the very technology that we seem to focus on allows us to have more access and a better comprehension of history than at any other point.
Oh, I know. I do not know what I would do without online databases. I mean, I know so much just because so much has been digitized, that I would have taken hours and hours in specialized research to find out. But I can just pull up, when I'm interested, I can pull up an article that's in archive.com or something. Or a book, even.
I would say with kids, I mean, you're planning this stuff out, get them involved in reading, really. Just leave it open for things and encourage them to explore. I mean, when I was growing up, you had just regular public library, and they still do. But, with digital, I mean, there's access to, like, a whole other kind of aspect of that. But I would read the kids' books, and I would go through them, and then I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is boring. This is not challenging. So I'd walk up to the librarian and say, okay, can I go to the adult section? She'd be like, no. And then I go back 6 months later. Can I go to the adult section? I got old enough, 10, 11, 12 years old, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, just don't do anything stupid. Because some of the books in the adult section are expensive. They're really, we're talking $60, $70 books in some cases.
Absolutely.
So both it's encouraging children to challenge themselves, but also teaching them a sense of responsibility. That these things are important, and the information is important. The actual thing itself, the book, is important. So by doing that, it's good. And as a parent, you have the opportunity to effectively go around that by basically, okay, here's an app. Here's a series of websites. You can go on here for a little while, and here's some books that you can look into. Give them suggestions, and then let them do a little of that on their own. I did very well in school because I was always reading.
Yeah.
I was reading stuff just for my own sake, so I already knew the material before it was even being taught.
Yeah.
So.
And I wish I had that, because my parents didn't really promote reading with me, but it was actually the Harry Potter series that got me interested in reading. Before that, I could care less. But I mean, it just implanted like a thirst for it, and that's the sort of thing that I want to implant in my future kids, is like this support or this thirst and love for learning, whatever the form it is.
The thing is with kids and especially teenagers, taboo is a nice little motivator. If there's something that they feel that is sort of out of their reach, and you dangle it a little bit, they're going to want to search it. It's like, okay, so these kids that are 2 or 3 years older than me are reading this stuff. Well, I want to know what the heck that is. That's why I use the example of the adult section library. I saw kids that were 13, 14, 15 years old going in there for book reports or whatever, or even just for their own thing. I'm like, I want to do that. So I would eventually get to a point where I could go and read it. And there's good reason for that, because you know how it is. Speaking of future focus, children want to be adults now. Yeah. Like yesterday, they want to be adults, and that's a motivator for them to explore and to grow and to improve. So if they didn't have that, we probably wouldn't be where we are right now.
Yeah.
And it's our job to sort of mold them. I actually had a child development teacher tell me that the job of parents and support systems is to shake the ego of children, kind of give them boundaries from which to explore, because kids are kind of all over the place. They're not specific. They're ambiguous, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So we give them general boundaries from which to explore so that they have a little bit of structure and foundation to do so. Everybody awake?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
Just took me a while to unmute myself. I was kind of looking at a different tab.
Okay. No problems.
Hey, yeah, the topic, roll with it. I got nothing right now. I threw all my cards on the table early in the evening, so I'm pretty much done.
I gotcha.
I've been reading this good book here. Trying to find the page I was in now. There's a quote. I was wondering what the audience was thinking about, but I gotta find it again because I put it down and I took my finger out of. The old proverb, which urged man to acquire the knowledge of himself, was a sound one. If it is considered a shame to be ignorant of facts about life, self-ignorance is much more shameful, because it makes us deceive ourselves in matters of great importance, and so walk through life blindfold. However, the more valuable piece of advice is the more careful we must not be to abuse, or be not, oh sorry, the more careful we must be not to abuse it, as certain philosophers do. When they urge man to know himself, their motive is that he should not be ignorant of his own brilliance and position. They want to see in himself only the things which will fill him with false confidence and inflate his pride. was a really interesting way of, the whole Socrates know thyself, paradigm. And I was just thinking about, what you guys think about, is that really a sincere call, or is it more or does it tend, instead of pointing towards you greater knowledge of the world, just inflating your own sense of pride and ego?
Well, the way I look at it, they're not actually encouraging you to really know yourself. It's a superficial knowledge of self, an egotism, not an actual true expression of your own desire. That's how I would personally look at it. So, and that's basically what a lot of philosophy would have described as sophistry. Those who appear to be or project themselves as being wise men when really they're trying to sell you something. Like buy my book. Fucking sophists. It's self-examination. Knowing yourself isn't just knowing how you feel. It's knowing what you are. It's really taking a good, hard look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing. I would argue that the reason why Suton was such a big phrase in Greek philosophy was because it was a lifelong experiment. It was a lifelong journey, a lifelong process that every person goes through, whether that's half-hearted or full bore. Welcome, Clayton.
I don't think you're ever going to have someone that can show you who you are. You can find that through someone, but it can't be something that they show you.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone peddling that, I would stay away from.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I also find it very important to find myself, because through that I will find my purpose, and I will have a purpose. A lot of people search forever for that.
Yeah. This is, the passage goes on, and, it says, but self-knowledge consists first of all, in this, but that's, it's actually Calvin, the Institutes of the Christian Religion. It goes into talk about knowing God and ourselves, and knowing our identity as a way of knowing about everything else in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And my current concepts of God would be much different than what your book would be leading to, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm 110% positive of that as well.
But it is still valuable to know, from our sort of perspectives, as it is. You've heard a lot of what we've said, so.
Well, and that's why I didn't go into the rest of the passage, because I try to bring things that are valuable to all, not just myself. Although I will recommend anyone who hasn't to at least read part of the Institutes, at least get the main idea of it, because it's one of the most important books in history.
Yeah, a lot of people don't study Luther or Calvin, so it is definitely valuable to understand for the history of Europe.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's really to their shame, because what not reading books will lead you to is just ignorance, and a lot of people talk about things as if they know intimately about them because they read a Wikipedia article on Luther or Calvin, and it's just it's a shame.
It is.
I'm sure you feel the same way about your own sources for what you believe.
Have you ever heard someone mention the concept of that it is the greater crime to read little than to read none at all.
It's an interesting concept.
No,
Yeah,
but
because
I see that.
it's basically like if you don't read at all you have is, you know, your own thoughts, what you come up with yourself, and they're probably not that great considering you're not, you know, getting into others' thoughts. But if you're only given a few thoughts of another, you tend to kind of like stick with that and you don't explore outside of it. But, you know, of course it would lead to be well read is the best solution to get a wealth of various different ideas.
Well, it's kind of like this, you know, if you have a particular hobby or pursuit or subject that you particularly are not interested in, instead of half-assing it and reading a little bit of something and then forming a judgment, it can be considered more honest, more genuine to say this is not something that I'm particularly interested in, so I'm not going to read up about it. So when somebody confronts you about it, you said that's just not something that I've explored, and that ends it. Whereas, you know, you have a lot of people who form these often very aggressive and negativistic sort of views about a certain thing when they've only barely scratched the surface of the actual subject itself. So I think that's probably what that phrase is largely sort of speaking to. But that's just my opinion here.
Yeah, that's a very very specific take on it. I would say that applies just as well.
Yeah, there's another saying, you know, there are two things that change a person, and that is who you meet and the books that you read. And really, I think it's just who you meet, because the books that you read are essentially just the ideas of other people written down on paper.
Yeah, you meet people through that. Books, almost any form of entertainment or discovery. It doesn't have to be who you meet. It can be a place you go. It can be a movie you watch, a game you play, anything of that nature. Any experience, really.
Yeah, sure. You're shaped by your environment.
Yeah. I almost think it would be better for me to move to another environment than let this one shape me anymore.
Fair enough. Well, who knows? Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah. I was making some inroads, and I felt like I was really helping some people, but then I aggressively burnt some bridges. I don't know if I was the one that burnt the bridges, but I was the one that lit the fire, I'm sure. I guess that's how I put it. I didn't expect the overreaction from someone involved.
Well, you live in a rather rural area.
Yeah, it's a logging area.
Well, people have been there for generations, and not a lot has changed. And they've had very little reason to change, very little impetus to explore anything different. It's just kind of how it is, you know.
Yeah, it was just over like religious expression in public places, kind of thing, and then yeah.
Well, let me guess. They wanted to make exception to Christian expression, and then everything else was forbade or looked down upon, or not something that they would really accept.
Yeah, it started with, like, you know, the Pledge of Allegiance, with the inclusion of God in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then it went to prayer in school and stuff, and they're like, well, I think if they want to lead a prayer in school, then you know, you could, you know, opt out of it, and that would be fine. I'm like, to make it fair, you have to pray to everything that's involved with everyone in that classroom. You know, it's just it would be cumbersome, and then that's not, you know, and everyone would have to listen to the next guy over's, you know, a little bit and stuff, and like, it's not the place for it, and it's just, I mean, there's either like, it's either very one-sided and it's going to give to the majority, and it's going to say that, you know, it's going to elevate them above the minority, or it's going to be raised to a level of absurdity and serve no one really.
Mm.
And that's kind of basically what I said. And then I had someone who I saw as a friend, and I went to her and I discussed with her how I found that conversation to be frustrating. And she told me that if I don't like it here, I can move to Syria and then stop talking to me. So apparently I didn't know her as well as I thought.
So your only two options are extreme fundamentalist, uneducated Christian, or Sharia law. That's wonderful.
Yeah, oh man, there are a lot of people. There's not a lot of people. There are a couple people that are in like these Google Hangouts that are exactly like almost everyone I meet where I'm at.
Oh yeah. In some
totally
manifestation.
binary. You're with us or you're against us. There's no other options, and we don't want to coexist with you.
I find
we don't want to allow you to be you, and it's just
it can be frustrating, but I think perspective is a very valuable thing. Really step outside of their beliefs and look at them as a person. What exactly in a person makes that? Why would somebody go about it in that way? And the only answer that really matters is they are deeply, deeply insecure. That they feel that they need to impress that upon everyone else, or be in an area in which where everyone else conforms to that. And what gets me, what keeps me going in a lot of cases, pity. I just have pity for people that are that narrow. I can't really be angry at somebody who's so pathetic.
Like I've said before, when I pity someone like that, I feel compelled to help them, to free them from that, and
yeah, well,
it drives me crazy because these are my inner drives. These are the things that push me. This is that purpose that I found.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that pity can't really manifest on the individual you're feeling pity for.
I know. You're going to start speaking rational things to my emotional responses to my situations that I feel I can't really help.
One thing that I would add is when I approach groups like this or any other group that doesn't share my beliefs, part of our theology is grace. It's this idea that, you as because we believe that as Christians we're not capable of making a choice for Christ, that God must work in our hearts to draw us to Himself, and then to regenerate us and everything else. When we speak with non-believers, then we have no position or right, or because of in our own theology, to say to somebody, you're an idiot, or you just have some sort of failure of knowledge, because it doesn't compute. If how salvation works is through Christ's calling and the Holy Spirit working in one's heart, then yes, I'm under obligation to preach the gospel when I can, repent and believe and all that, but at the same token, I'm not going to hold it against someone that they're dead in their trespasses and sins, because that's exactly where I was, and there was nothing that I did through my own effort to put myself in a state of grace. God Himself worked in my life and put me into a state of grace. And so, there is no, I have no problem with an interfaith hangout. I have no problem with people of faiths talking to each other in civil society, rubbing ideas against each other, etc. I have an issue with, you know, my organization working side by side with somebody else's organization and, you know, shaping our beliefs around this sort of interfaith mishmash. But that's a different thing. So,
yeah, it's definitely.
I mean, I'm not trying to be condescending. It's just, you know, it's bred out of the theology of grace.
I'm not feeling that you are. I was wondering, I would like to ask you some questions, and anything you don't want to answer, that's fine, because you being a Christian, I just want to get some of your perspective. My first question was, do you live in the United States?
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that your faith is oppressed in any way?
I feel that it does not hold the prominence in society that it once did.
Okay.
As far as oppressed,
do you feel
people
that
people in ISIS are oppressed. People in the United States are uncomfortable.
There's like your natural level of hungry, like an appropriate, healthy level of hungry, but you're walking through the Yorkdale.
Okay. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I couldn't see the green bar I usually see, but now it's back again. I got to remember where I was. All right. I had one more question, but I might have to remember what that was. I did not write them down. But I just, because I get told things by, and you know, Kevin might be onto something. It might just be an insecurity thing, but there is a lot of, specifically in this area, I haven't really gotten it too heavy in some other areas. When you have a view that is counter, or you are unapologetically non-Christian, and you're talking to a group of Christians, they here I often am told that I am trying to oppress them or restrict them or hold them back from expressing and living their faith, which I don't entirely know what they mean by that, but I feel that it's so aggravating for me, because I know that they have a majority voice, and that there is no great power that I have to stop them from anything. And if they feel like they're victims to begin with, then I only see bad things coming of that mentality, and that's why I ask these questions.
Yeah, I think the kind of false victimization that you see is more symptomatic of just the larger society. So Christianity is one strain within a larger society, and we, I think, as a culture, feel that, you know, our ideas are the best ones and the right ones, and that other people should believe them. If you don't believe that, you can look into progressive politics and how, you know, how progressives view education, for instance, especially the more statist ones. And so, I mean, I think the problem isn't embedded in Christianity. It's embedded in Western American culture in today's society. Christians will use the excuse of, you know, there's many passages in the Bibles that say you will be persecuted, but that's more out of convenience than any legitimate persecutions within America. I mean, there are places that there is some subtle persecution. So, like, discrimination against parents who choose to homeschool their kids, discrimination for Christian organizations on secular campuses because they feel that the leadership should be Christian if you're going to be in a Christian club, and so that is seen as a violation of most student handbook policies because they say you cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. So, I mean, there are definitely some issues that do exist and are real issues. They're not fabrications. But you know, this isn't ISIL. You know, the state doesn't have a policy of persecuting Christians. This isn't, you know, the early Roman Empire. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, I'm just scared of like the influence on politics to start allowing certain discriminations, and they seem to be protective of, and it's more particular to certain regions of the United States.
Well,
where it seems to protect Christianity over the other options.
Oh, absolutely, and you will find if you do take a hard look at early American history and the other development, there are a lot of states where it was illegal to be Catholic. Pennsylvania, even though it was supposed to be the most religiously tolerant of the colonies, did have a ban on Catholicism at one point. There were certain cities and towns where you couldn't live unless you were a certain faith. So, like, you couldn't live in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, unless you were a Moravian. There was a very long line of historical. I mean, Pennsylvania for the longest time had blue laws. You could not work on Sunday. No business could be open on Sunday except for hospitals, nursing homes, and other necessary businesses, like ambulances and stuff like that.
I think more than I fear for anything that may befall me and make my life difficult is that I know when you start having laws like this, those who don't agree, those who are not under that, are not, you know, those who are being denied protections and the protections are being given to another group, they tend not to like that very much, and they will begin to feel desperate, and desperate people do extreme things. And I think that's my greatest fear if we progress down that path, because not everyone's going to agree with a faith.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever get that. And I personally, my personal values, a lot of them are in direct conflict with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I would also keep in mind that Christianity is often not about the religion itself, but the culture that surrounds it. So, like, if you were in the Bible Belt, everybody's a Christian, not because they believe in Christianity, but because you are ostracized if you're not. And it's like, you know, that. I mean, the way pastors describe it, because it's really hard to minister to these people because they think they're all Christian, is, you know, if you ask somebody in, you know, Tennessee, South Carolina, you know, are you a Christian? They'll say, hell yes. If you ask somebody in Florida or New England or something like that, they're going to say, hell no. And it has everything to do with culture. It doesn't actually have to do with anything about that personal belief. So I just want to throw that out there too. That sort of threatened feeling is going to be, you know, it's going to be derived from that too. It's not just belief.
I wish that people find their way and that they know where they stand, and that it isn't under cultural pressures that they decide who they are and what they want to do with their lives. That's just the personal value of mine. I don't particularly care what they decide, as long as they're not being coerced. I do want to say that I appreciate the humility you come with, because I don't always get that, and your willingness to have a discussion and to answer my questions. If there were more people like you, I'd have a lot less to worry about.
Well, that's why everyone should become Reformed Presbyterians, and I'll stand by that.
Yeah, I don't know why little old me is so threatening to some people. It seems so silly because I don't really mean them any harm. I'm just trying to avoid myself from being harmed in what I believe is best for the greater society. I think that these things, I'm primarily, because this is, how I am, I know that I'm a little more selfish than some, and I primarily want these things for myself, but I also believe that these things that benefit me will benefit the majority of people in the end and in the long run. But I do think I'm out of questions. I think my other question was pretty much answered with the other things you were saying. So
okay. I have a question.
I thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah. I have a question for you. Have you ever read any of the Reformed creeds or catechisms, like the Heidelberg Catechism or the Westminster Confession of Faith?
No, I have not.
I would recommend it. They're both free, available online. Heidelberg Catechism is an easier read, but if you want to know what the content is of Christian belief, at least the way that I see it, those would be the places to go, either the Westminster Confession or the Heidelberg Catechism.
If you can give me some links, I will put them on my bookmarks, and I'll get to them later. I'm more than willing to entertain anyone's ideas. I'd be a hypocrite otherwise. It's a core belief for me. It's just really hard to do so when people are yelling their beliefs at you. Since you're not yelling, then I'll grant you a chance.
I'm surrounded by people who yell, so I've made a point. I make a point not to yell.
Well, I think my two least favorite arguments for Christianity are the well, God said so argument, and the that God's right, but you're just rebelling argument. Yeah, those two are the ones that I hear the most. Oh, could you imagine? I do have some other ones. And I'm just taking for granted that you can believe that we may disagree on what's the best for whatever group of people, but that what I'm working for that may be counter towards what you're working for, that I still am working towards what I believe is the best, even though we disagree, that I have good intentions for what I'm doing?
I would say that you have pretty well thought out intentions for what you're doing, like anyone else.
Right.
In general, because of my theology, I would say, any non-believer is going to be captive to their own heart, as opposed to captive to God, and so, generally, I'm sort of prepared for the sort of avenues that takes you down, because it's just your starting point, and and there's just a natural progression to go down either road, and both Christians and non-Christians, the way they formulate their arguments, there's divisions even within Christianity about that. There are some people within Christianity that feel that their argument for God should be built upon ego, I, myself. I think, Descartes changed the world when he said, "I think, therefore I am," and used that as a support for God's existence. And since then, that sort of sparked off the modern era of formulating, ideas that start with yourself and then are built from reason to a precipice. Me, as a Reformed Christian, I'm a presuppositionalist, so I believe that all knowledge and even knowing oneself starts with God, and then God being the Father of reason, brings you to an understanding. The closer you are to God, the closer you are to reason, the closer you are to the Logos. And if the Bible points you to that, John 1, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was God, and the Logos with, that whole thing. So,
I find it.
I'm going to recognize that there's a debate there, and I'm just going to say that I definitely do stand on the side of the presuppositionalist.
Well, when I've heard presuppositionalist, I take that as the people who say that I know God and I'm willfully rebelling. That's how I've heard that term used.
Yeah. So there's a general knowledge of God and there's a special knowledge of God. The general knowledge of God is more simply, there's something out there, there's some truth out there, and I'm going to go look for it. Often, that's going to be termed as a God-fearer, somebody who doesn't really know who God is, but they're essentially agnostic. And so it is, there's a lot of places where the Bible says, the fool in his heart says there is no God. And, really, I think it could be reworded and retermed, the fool in his heart says there's no truth. Because as soon as you ask a coherent question, you're assuming that there's a coherent answer. That there is some truth somewhere, otherwise you wouldn't ask questions. And in terms of special knowledge, that comes from God alone, as essentially, Jesus Christ, who Jesus Christ is, who God is, what the Trinity is, what is salvation, what is sin, what is redemption, why do I need Christ? All of those things are special revelation, and so it's not as or it doesn't have to be as razor sharp, polarized as it tends to be.
Well, basically what I'm getting at is that you don't necessarily believe that I have to have bad intentions because I stand opposed to you. That I'm willfully your enemy. That it's not. There's no gray there. I'm lacking the right word to quite say that.
Well, I would just like to point out what the Bible says, and that is, all were once counted as enemies of God, including myself. So.
Because as you said, that I guess when you're searching for knowledge, and if I misrepresent you, let me know. That you start with yourself, and then eventually you lead to God. The way I've looked at from my worldview is you start looking for the answers in others, and you get to finding them in yourself.
Yeah.
So my value is inverse to yours, and my path to wisdom is the inverse. So that.
Well, I wouldn't say that at all, because that isn't my view. My view is that you must know God before you can know yourself.
Okay.
That's from
I
the
could
Institute.
see that being a little more in line with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
I do believe in something that I would refer to as a god.
There's
So
yeah, the first
mine's a little less personal than yours, or a lot less personal. How often do you talk to non-Christians
all
about
the time.
your beliefs?
One of my wedding parties is a atheist and is staunchly so. He refuses to budge. But he knows more Christian theology than most Christians, so I respect him a lot.
I find that that's a pretty common thing. But
yeah, you just love to study the Bible for some reason.
Well, it's strange to me though, because a lot of the times it's really, I feel a lot of atheists study the Bible only in an attempt to discredit it, and that makes them feel better because they feel marginalized by the wider society.
Well, I studied it as a Christian.
Yeah.
When I first studied it, so I would have to say at that time that I wanted it to ring true. I wanted it to be the purpose I was looking for. I just didn't find it to be so.
Yeah, I was, well, my parents are non-Christians, but my grandmother took me to a Pentecostal church, and when I was around middle school age, started thinking for myself. I said that this is fake, this is not real. This whole going into convulsions on the floor, speaking in tongues, you're speaking gibberish, your convulsions are manufactured, and you guys are terrible. And then I sort of dabbled with, pantheistic ideas, and pretty much considered myself atheist agnostic until about the middle of high school. And then I still decry Pentecostalism. I've told you I'm Reformed. And I think that there's, I don't regret turning my back on those beliefs because they're wrong. So.
Well, I'd say for you, they're probably less right. I think wrong from. I'm just guessing from your where you stand. From what I understand from what you've said, I would say that they're probably less right. Now, some of the things I believe for you would be wrong. It's a much starker comparison.
When I'm saying wrong, I'm using the context of what I believe the Scripture teaches, what I believe the historic Christian faith has taught, those sorts of things.
I believe where you can that it's better to talk in degrees than in absolute, because there's degrees of people doing things right, and when I see that, I can find things that you've said that I can find agreeable, and that could lead to, that could preserve peace, because I'd rather not fight.
No, and
I learned at a very young age, in the realms of the physical at least, that the best fights, the best victory that one can have is to not fight. So.
Oh yeah, I would just like to say, like our good philosopher friend Polanyi said, there is, while we talk in relatives, there is an absolute, and we wouldn't be talking if we didn't actually believe that there was an absolute somewhere. Just the fact it isn't necessarily that you have the. Sorry?
I was saying if the absolute was a little more clear to everyone, we'd have less to talk about.
I think the fact that there is an absolute gives people a reason for talking, though. Yeah, it's just the reason I hold my opinion to be valuable is, that opinions are valuable. What makes them valuable? The fact that there is a correct opinion, and our job is to take our opinions and throw them up against each other, and learn and formulate new opinions, and so the chaos continues.
Well said.
Yeah, Kevin, I think absolutes are necessary. I think that it's the height of foolishness to claim that what you're saying at any given moment is the absolute truth. But at the same time, I think that the fact that there is a truth out there is really what makes the whole art of having opinions work.
Yeah, I would love if you maybe not your specific brand of Christianity, but to others who may think a little different than that, that would be that is a great line of reasoning that I wish you could spread to some of your other various brethren, because that is a huge bit of conflict, is the not only holding to absolutes, but believing that they know the desires of those absolutes, that they themselves embody the will of God. It feels as if a lot of people speak to me as if they know that they know it all. And
I feel your pain, because it is scary, and there's a big problem with that among Baptist evangelicals and a lot of the fundamentalist sects, because their whole idea is that the authority is the Bible, and I believe the Bible, and so everything I believe about the Bible is right. And as a confessional Christian, as a confessional evangelical, I stick to the confessions. The Westminster Standards, the Heidelberg Catechism, and they serve as a check on the minister or whoever is putting out their garbage, to say, hey, no, you don't have supreme authority on all matters religious. And the ideas that you're teaching aren't very good. In fact, you do not have you are not the sole possessor of absolute truth. There's a much wider conversation going on, and I'm constantly facing criticism from evangelicals, Arminians, who are opposed to Calvinism, and it's a struggle, because they believe that they have the absolute truth, and they cannot be discussed with, and it's hard.
I'm going to explain something to you just so you get a perspective of how I think and how I view things. Is when a person speaks of their God, to me what they are speaking of is something that isn't necessarily external to them. It's their internal desires and wants, their ideals, and to them it manifests as an external being that they then place divine authority on to further validate their desires. And I think that even if there is an external God for a lot of people, I think there are people even within Christianity, that I almost certainly believe they're doing this, that they create themselves into the God that they see, and it's really frightening when you see that, and you almost see like a drunkenness of power within them when they get down this absolute knowledge of God's will kind of thing.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because I believe that that's probably the God that most people speak of comes from that source, but there are people that make it look more true than others, if that makes sense. Like for certain people, I believe that model is, I'm more certain that that's what they're doing than other people. Like with you, I could believe that you're getting this from an external source. It seems more legit that it's not your own selfish agenda and your own desires to control and your fear of what others would do if they don't follow these rules. So for you, it's harder to say with certainty that that's what you're doing. I don't know if anyone's still around to talk, but I need to go to the restroom real quick, so I'm going to be muted for a bit. I will still be able to hear you, though, if you want to speak.
All right. Welcome back, Dusty.
Anything exciting going on in California?
Not necessarily. Having a little bit of rain down here. It's been nice. We need it. I mean, as far as like current affairs, current events, or anything, nothing that I've really caught wind to. Nothing important. You know, I mean, there's plenty of like celebrity news and crap like that, but I try my best not to pay attention to that. As far as like in California, my own life, not a whole lot. I mean, but just kind of keeping my budget where it needs to be and running errands and all that good stuff. So it's been a slow last couple of weeks after my brother's wedding. So
Gotcha.
Not much.
Yeah, we've been having nothing but snowstorm after snowstorm. The other evening I was coming back late at night from a 50th birthday party we celebrated for my mom, and I was being passed on the road by snowmobiles. I was so happy I didn't get stuck anywhere. There was a big one of the local pizza places got a tractor trailer drove right through the dining room of it. They said they're going to be opening it up again, though. They just sealed off the dining room. The rest of the building's still a wreck.
Welcome back, Amber.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, some other questions I got. No, I'm just full of them, right? So when you talk to non-believers, are they? I'm assuming they're mostly atheists. Am I correct in that? Or like very agnostics.
They tend to be. I mean, it used to be when I was like early in my college years. It used to be just hardline atheists, agnostics, but anymore it seems that I'm through my later college years and since it's been I have a lot of friends that are Wiccan, Buddhist, Hindu. I have some really good Muslim friends, relationships I've been able to develop. I co-led some organizations with some Muslim friends. So, I've definitely been exposed to a wide variety of beliefs and thought critically about them as well. I know there are Christians who think that they're engaging with atheists when they focus on all this stuff that William Lane Craig puts out and stuff like that, but it's wrong-footed. William Lane Craig is obviously one of these guys who actually does believe that you can arrive at belief through starting with oneself and then using reason to get there. It's this whole site called Reasons to Believe, and I really decry that whole method. I think it's wrong-footed.
Do you find that the arguments or discussions or whatever you want to call them, the topics that come up, do they vary much from different groups to different groups?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any examples? I just like getting other people's perspective. So this seems to be like a once in a blue moon opportunity for me. I'm just trying to get as much out of you as I can.
A lot of discussion with my Eastern friends surrounds how we conceive of the connectedness of the world and logic itself. So, like a Hindu or a Buddhist is more willing to accept contradiction, people who follow Aristotelian logic do not follow that very well. So I've had some pretty heated arguments about that. In addition to that, I find my discussions with Wicca tend to be very varied because it really depends on the person in question for where they sort of source their beliefs, whether it's coven or just consumerism of religious beliefs. And I mean, there are many Christians that I interact with that I really wonder where they get their ideas from. So, and their ideas can be all across the board. I mean, from people who will condemn you for having even an inkling of idea about evolution, which I do, have an inkling of an idea about evolution. I understand why that's such a problem for so many people. Young Earth, old Earth. The list goes on and on. Fundamentalists. The people that I cannot get along with at all are fundamentalist Baptists. Oh my gosh. And neo-Orthodox liberals who think everything is a symbol and has no real meaning outside of the meaning that you give to it. So it's just, the neo-Orthodox are just annoying because they like to twist everything that you say to fit what their idea of it. So we both talk about a resurrected Christ, but for the neo-Orthodox, well, we're all here and we're all in our church and we're talking about Christ, so Christ is resurrected in each and every one of us. that sort of thing. It's more of a social club that goes out and tries to do, socially beneficial activities.
I'm going to share a little of my perspective on some things. I find that I'm most often discussing. I'm most often in conflict with Christians because there's just more of you around. So there's no real other reason. And there's a lot of disagreement I have with Christianity. I have just as much disagreement with Islam, maybe slightly more. It's hard to say. It's roughly the same things that you hold in common that I disagree with. But there's just very few of them, so that doesn't come up too often. But to be fair, if you were in equal numbers, it would probably be equal amounts. But my beliefs don't really have a salvation or redemption that you're working towards. So as long as you're not interfering with my liberties and my freedoms in a way that I feel is overstepping your bounds, I am open to letting people do what they want. So I often find that there's a lot of groups of people I don't even have to have the discussion with, because they're already, even if they're saying they're like a Buddhist says they're a Buddhist, but they're living a life in accordance to what I value, then that's just as good to me as if they were practicing what I practice, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of people I don't even have to have this discussion with. I find that a lot of atheists also fall into this, but that there are atheists that don't. So there are atheists that I have to question, and I get in conflicts with them. But it definitely seems to be those who have a a horse in the race of you. The ultimate goal is to get you to their faith. So Christianity has that desire for everyone to be Christian. I'm sure you'd agree with that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm not shy of telling people,
right. I fully accept that. I understand.
Yeah.
And I'm also someone who I'm willing to be open about contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think most contradictions, as people set them up, are false contradictions. And a lot of them come from like a lot of false dichotomies, where they give you two choices, and there's a lot of yes or no questions that really aren't yes or no questions, and things like that. And I think that when you get too stuck into the logic, I think that people start thinking that there are fallacies where there aren't fallacies. They overcall the fallacies. And I believe that if they had more of that Eastern mindset that can fully accept a contradiction, not only, disprove a contradiction as being not a contradiction, I think some of that's very valuable, because I often find that people will, like you said, they'll make the argument fit their narrative. No matter how I respond to it, they'll take it how they believe I believe. And they won't listen to me. That's an aggravating thing too. I'm glad that you are not doing that. That's about all I have on that. I mean, I often try to set up things on purposes, like paradoxes, and use juxtapositions to make things seem contradictory, just to try to see if I can bend someone's mind a little, get them to think a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, in order to be a Christian, you must embrace paradox, because otherwise you're never going to be able to arrive at the orthodox formulation of the Trinity, or the hypostatic union of Christ. You need to understand what a contradiction is. A contradiction isn't simply just A and not A. It's A and not A at the same time and in the same relationship. And so there are, I mean, when you think of Trinity or the hypostatic union, etc., they're seeming contradictions because they aren't the same thing, but they don't fully meet the criteria of A and not A at the same time and in the same relationship.
The weird thing is how core that is to a lot of Christian, if you have a Trinitarian belief, because I know there's groups that, call themselves Christian that don't, and there are groups that call themselves Christian that do. If you have that Trinitarian belief, yeah, that's a paradox, but those same people will not allow me to have paradoxes often. Another aggravating thing. And when you try to explain how it's not necessarily contradictory. So I'm glad that you are self-aware of that. Being self-aware of things is something I value highly too, and I admire seeing in other people.
Absolutely, and I think being aware of your being aware of your beliefs will help you to be able to carefully articulate them for others. I mean, it's only to your benefit and the benefit of others to know what you believe.
Yeah, and I think there's a particular person that I've met in some of these Google Hangouts who, what I find so disturbing about how they reason is they believe they've hit the pinnacle and there's no more improving for them, and that we all just need to get to where they're at. I don't like the idea of any not necessarily faith, but any practice in life where you have this, okay, I've arrived, I'm done. That's a very disturbing system for me, because I think that this great thing that you have, this life you have, it's meant to be a learning experience, and experiences all the way through, that you should constantly be improving, and that it's set up in such a way that you always can be improving.
I completely agree. One of the things that we teach within Reform circles is the cultural mandate in Genesis, which is the commandment to Adam and Eve to build civilization, fill the earth, multiply. And really that references building civilization, build schools, do science, use your God-given creativity. You live in a universe that is infinitely vast, and ideas are infinite in how many can be conceived and tested. It really is a call to human flourishing that I think falls on deaf ears sometimes. And I mean, it all stems from knowing an infinite God within the Christian context. I mean, infinity is just so darn important. I can't even stress that enough. It stimulates everything. It keeps everything going because it's boundless.
Are you pretty regular to this hangout, this weekly event?
I was here for like the first 10 or so, then I moved and I didn't have internet for a month. Okay. But now we have internet, so I'm back on.
Because I see that you and Kevin seem to know each other, and I don't recognize you, so that's why I'm asking. Just trying to get information. Have you met a Discordian or a KO and known them to be such, or is this the first time for you?
A KO?
Chaote. Chaote. Chaos Mage.
Chaos Mage. Okay.
Yes, like Kevin
No.
wrote.
I mean,
Okay.
outside of
If you met,
within the larger
if you met one, they
category
did tell you that they were. Is what you're saying? Yes, a coyote. Thank you. One who worships coyotes.
Gotcha.
No, I don't worship coyotes, but some people like to believe I do. We have a lot of them around, but that's about it. Yeah, I'm just, because I don't know. It's sometimes unfair because I know quite a bit about Christianity, and it's a kind of a double-edged sword too, because I'll get in a discussion with someone, and I remember that there was a woman back when I used to be in Stickam having similar conversations. She always said that I was like a ambiguous, obscure theist or something, like, you know, a nondescript theist. And I'm like, it's very descript. You just don't know it. You're like, you just lack the knowledge. It doesn't mean that I'm like, it's not as nebulous as you make it out to be. You just haven't inquired. You haven't looked into it, kind of thing. But that does give me some leverage, because there's mystery there where you don't have knowledge. But I think you came a little late, but I pretty much threw down the basics when I first got in here. But I'm revealing tidbits here and there, I guess, of the things I value, at least, which I think is more important. It's more important to the way I operate is the pragmatic and what comes because of the beliefs, the fruits that it bears. And I judge other faiths according to that too. And not just the faith, the individuals, because there are Christians who, what they produce disgusts me, but that's not true of all of you. So.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, there's certain similarities that just sort of emerge with discussions that I have with non-believers, and one of them is definitely this sort of utilitarian pragmatism combined with almost like an emotional egoism that sort of works hand in hand. And so you really value, you know, certain ideas, but in so much as they're useful, you know, have great utility, or, you know, they make sense for you emotionally because of certain things that happened in your life, whether they be tragedy or you know, comedy, really.
Well, I do believe I'm a slave to my environment.
Yeah.
So I think it all comes from that. And what you just said, yes, I would argue that I am an extreme form of that, even amongst non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
If that's something you see in non-believers, and I would agree, that is something I definitely see in people who do not follow an Abrahamic religion. And I would say that for me, more so than most the rest. And it's good that you can recognize that, you can see that, because then you can understand why I find certain things more important or less important, why I'm concentrating on the bigger issues for myself. You can understand my motivations. And I feel that that's the problem, is when I stay mysterious, then, you know, that doesn't help me further my cause, because there's no understanding there. So I'm trying just to make sure you understand, and you seem to be pretty wise on these subjects, so I see a good deal of understanding in you.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I, I'm happy to, listen and entertain because, I really like I said earlier, I mean, I once felt the exact same way. Or not, maybe not the exact same, but a similar, way.
Yeah. If it's any consolation, you make me reconsider my when I say things like I'd rather go to hell than to spend eternity with your God, because I often say that to the Christian that makes that heaven seem like a worse consequence, it's just the way they describe their God.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to get people on board with the idea that there is no rapture. I don't think that it's biblical. I think that the imagery that goes along with the rapture is more about, when a king would enter a city, you would go meet the king based on the prominence of that figure, and so this whole, the end times is really Jesus coming down to earth and manifesting his kingdom. So, it's just, as a result, you know, I don't really feel that, hell is a place on earth. People go through hell every day, and hell is, in my understanding, separation from God and not being able to partake in the celestial kingdom,
And
the earthly kingdom, essentially the earthly kingdom, and to have that, eternal life. It's like,
well, it's even better when you describe hell as separation from God, because that's even better for the point, and because pardon the language such, but I don't know better words to describe it. But when you make your God, when someone makes their God sound like such a douche, I mean, the one thing you want more than anything is separation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, and I agree with you that I believe that rapture is non-biblical. I think it was just someone thought up a neat idea. They saw some verses that kind of fit with it, and it inspired them to come up with this other story.
It's something that sort of happened in Christianity starting in around oh gosh, it was really had to do with the 60s Jesus movement, dispensational theology. I don't know if you've ever heard that word before, but it's very popular. If you've ever heard of a Christian Zionist, someone who is a Christian who really supports Israel, they tend to be dispensationalists, because dispensationalists believe that God has a holy dispensation for the Gentiles, and a holy dispensation for the Jews, and part of that is a very sophisticated understanding of the rapture, and trying to pick out who the end time actors are and everything else.
Yeah.
It is a mess, and I have made it my goal to destroy dispensational theology as much as I can. I'm not an anti-Semite, but I think the infatuation of evangelicals with Judaism is insane, especially when they start applying New Testament scriptures in the way that they do.
I wouldn't I wouldn't accuse you of being anti-Semite, because I have my own views of the whole conflict over there, and it's mostly a state of apathy because it doesn't really affect me. I have no real stake in who claims the land over there, but I do think that the way it became Israel was less than ideal. But let's see, going back to that, I wonder if the people who came up with the concept of rapture, if they really didn't see it just turning around to kind of being a joke amongst those who don't believe, because we're all like, oh, so all the Christians leave. Sounds like peace will finally be upon the earth. You're like, just as soon as we get rid of those guys, everything will be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I remember that in a lot of the like more heavily atheistic chat rooms I've been to, and then like someone's talking about rapture, and they're all like saying, "Can't wait."
Yeah, the parodies are endless, and there was one that I saw recently that was actually pretty funny. And I mean, the movies, the books, the whole Left Behind series, it was a travesty because all it did was popularize that idea.
Yeah, it just reinforced all the negativity.
Oh yeah, and I mean, the whole idea is like God's coming judgment, and when Jesus talks about it, he says, the end of time, the end of days will be like the days of Noah. There were those who were taken, and those who were left. Those who were left behind were the righteous ones. They were the ones who were, taken on the ark, and stayed. Those ones who were taken, that weren't left behind were those who were killed by the flood. They were taken. So it's just nonsense. Beam me up, Scotty. I wonder if Rapture would even exist if it weren't for Star Trek.
Well, I think Rapture was an older concept than that. It was at least a medieval concept as well.
Yeah, it was, but it was understood differently. Medieval Rapture had more to do with embracing Christ than being beamed up toward him.
I would argue there's still the idea of being taken to heaven directly in Rapture, even back in the medieval times. But it definitely wasn't like when the Bible was being written and put together and assembled. It was many centuries until that even became something that was discussed.
Well, there were some early groups that went on to Mount Sinai and stuff, and just waited, sold all their things, and waited for the they do today sometimes. So I mean, I won't.
Or they will get together and commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because
Which, it's tragic, but it's probably
sometimes people check reason at the door, right?
Yeah.
Like all of it, wholesale.
Well, yeah. I mean, the burning of Alexandria, the library, Agora, the whole film that did that.
That was a terrible thing.
It was a terrible thing, and it was it had so much to do with politics, and so little to do with what these people actually believed.
You might feel even more. What was even worse than that happening is that there were Muslim groups that felt that they needed to at least be as notorious as the Christians, and they claimed to have burnt it down again. But it was never rebuilt for them to burn it down at a later date. So that's not even possible. But yet they said, "Oh yeah, we burned it down too."
Yeah.
Just a little bit later.
Yeah, there was this early time of just this really nice commingling of Muslim ideas and in bringing
burned down a very important building. So did we.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's that whole work, The Incoherence, The Philosophers, and a few others that just, man.
Well, there were times before that a lot of the library was, parts of it were destroyed because, that city was under siege often.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of scrolls that were damaged prior to that, but yeah, that took out the majority of it. The only writings that survived in that area were the ones that were in the smaller libraries.
Yeah.
There was another library that was relatively large that was untouched at the time too, and we're fortunate of that in that city. So,
Well, yeah, and I mean, a lot of the early, writings of the Greek philosophers were preserved in Baghdad by the Muslims.
right. That's and that area of the world when Europe kind of fell into like about as far as you can fall into the Dark Ages, the Middle Eastern area still flourished for quite a while longer.
Oh yeah.
And just too bad that the Middle Eastern area had a couple centuries later it fell into a dark age as well, and on a social level it hasn't ever recovered, and on other levels only a few of the countries have really recovered much. Some of that area is pretty much just as bad as it used to be. It's just now they have automatic weapons. But they still have a dark age mentality.
Yeah. Wahhabism started, very early and sort of morphed and changed into what it is today.
I feel really bad for those people in some of those areas. Some of them aren't as bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because, when you have a bad idea and it takes you captive, it can wield such destructive power.
The people you gotta really feel bad for are the people who disagree with that bad idea.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, Christians are being slaughtered. Sunni and moderate Muslims are being slaughtered. Jews are being slaughtered. It's
And I don't want to see those same kind of bad ideas cropping up anywhere else. I mean, I would love for someone or something to bring an end to it in those areas, but my deepest fears is that ideas like that spread, because they did across that area at least.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I would say it's not. A lot of the real bad ideas I'm seeing are in response, because there's people that are very against Islam that are just as bad, and their ideas are just as bad. I see them as equals, the extremists in that, and a lot of the current growing popularity of fascism and racial superiority in Europe right now. That's a pretty frightening thing to witness.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you're right. It's reactionary in a large part to the influences that they've seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's people in like a good example. I'd use the country of like Romania, where they will. There's large groups of people that are willing to politically back anyone who's just willing to kill off all the gypsies.
Yeah.
They're like, that's the solution. We get rid of them, everything's fine. I mean,
well, and
exactly what Hitler said, right? If we just get rid of the Jews and the gypsies and all the gays and stuff, we'll be just fine when they're all gone.
Yeah, and Germany, they've been having a lot of these anti-Islamization marches down in Dresden and a few other places. And historically, I mean, ever since they started importing Turkish people for cheap labor.
They did it to themselves.
Oh, the racial hatred against Muslim Turks is huge, and with the advent of the terrorism that we've seen, it has just so inflamed the feeling there.
Well, how you come over to the United States? How do we think of Mexicans? I mean, it's got the same seeds.
Yeah.
That's why you gotta be careful.
When I was in Germany, I felt that was synonymous with how we felt about Mexicans. You know, people we brought here for cheap labor that we no longer want.
Yeah, I mean, you conned them the whole way. And like,
oh yeah, and by rights, I actually feel that we should have made Mexico a state during the Mexican-American War. We were afraid to because of they were going to make Mexico a slave state, and that would have upsetted the balance of power
be
for
a
the
lot
slave.
of land to be slave state.
Yeah, yeah, and so that was a big issue. And Mexico has had issues. I mean, ever since, really, ever since we marched into Mexico City.
I find it amazing how much we're seeing eye to eye on these topics. And I like how you're treating all these groups of people as if they're people. That's refreshing.
Well, I was a history major, so I learned a lot.
I've seen a lot of grotesque racism, and particularly amongst people who identify as Christians.
Yeah.
Their solution is to kill everyone else, you know, a lot, and they say that like outright. And I also know Christians who believe that the answer to curing poverty is to just let all the poor people die. And then I wonder, like, I know, do you even read that book? You know, you just want to, like, I have this book I think you should read. It's called the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you want. Like, I'm not Christian, and I'm
like, read the Bible.
Maybe you should read the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's parts of the Bible that I find abhorrent and I think are gross, and I have a knee-jerk reaction against. But there are some good parts in there, and like they're not. I mean, it's like they're not even picking up on the parts I think are good. You know, the ones I think they should be living by.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, as a sort of final thought on that, it reminds me of the parable of the mustard seed, because I'm thinking any sort of soil that these people, their character is grown in, is not very great. It was very difficult to grow the fruits of the Spirit in Christians like that, who have such poor soil.
Absolutely.
You know, and I will agree, you know, to your defense, that these people are Christians because everyone around them is a Christian. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, it's that cultural identification. Where I'm from, most people don't think there's another option.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost like we're born in this area. This is Christian land. We're Christians.
Yeah.
And as I've stated before, I think that's counter to my values.
Yeah.
I want someone to. If you're to come to Christianity, I want you to come to it on your own terms.
Yeah. One of the hardest things, like I was discussing this Sunday, I was over at the pastor's house of the new church I'm going to, and we were talking about how hard it is to reach the area in which I live because it's all historic Christianity, you know, from the coal region. So we've got Irish Catholics, we've got Polish Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, all these different groups who are Christian, but because they were Irish, you know, because they were immigrant classes that came here and have just sort of held on to their religious identity because it's, you know, the family and what everybody does. And there's no real belief, you know, in, you know, Christian theology, etc. It's very hard because they're to sort of plant churches in that area because they're so insular. And you know, the alternatives for people are even worse because we have, you know, the alternative, our churches are all reactionary. They're fundamentalist. they are charismatic, very, Pentecostal-y, or they're neo-Orthodox liberal. They've completely rejected the faith altogether. So it's just like, to make inroads up here is just, it's, at least the way that we see it, is a very spiritually impoverished area, but it's hard to break down those cultural barriers. I remember, hearing the story of when my grandmother left Catholicism. It caused a rift within the Irish Catholic family that, she still faces, disdain from, and she's, in her 70s. So.
And I would imagine that the people with the extreme ideas are the ones that are raised in it in that way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I had a girl that liked me in high school, and for my birthday the one year, and this is after I was, sort of converted to Christianity, and she gave me a King James Bible, and she said, "Read this, because it isn't what's in yours." And she was a Fundy Baptist, King James version of the Bible only.
I had that a little bit last night. We had a King James only.
Yeah.
And he looked up a couple of verses, and he went over each specific word and why it was so important to have this one word in a verse and things like that.
It's so ridiculous, the whole. But I mean, it was hard. I mean, to even talk to her, and
Yeah. Well, I refer to the King James version of the Bible as the witch hunters version of the Bible. So. I don't have much respect for that version. I always find that the people I meet that are King James version only are the kind of people who, if they could get away with it, would be burning people at stakes. They just give me that kind of vibe. And it's not really an insult to the King James version of the Bible as much as it is the kind of people that are attracted to it.
Well,
I see common.
And there's so many contradictions. So I mean, these people who are King James only are very, very anti-homosexual. And you got to point out, King James is very flamboyant character. What do you think of that? And another one is, they also tend to be very anti-establishment, anti-government types.
Yeah, that version of the Bible is very leaning towards authority.
Yes, it's very pro-authority, pro-government, and in fact it was crafted as a reaction to Calvin's Geneva Bible, which was translated to English and had all this commentary about separation of powers and limiting government, and King James saw that as a threat. And obviously keeping his citizenry in line has had shockwaves into the present age.
Yeah.
But I gotta get going. I'm on the East Coast, so it's 2:13
now. That would be really damn late for you. Yeah, I need to go too. I have a job and things. It's not an ideal situation, but I'm making do with it. No, take care. Love the conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspective with me and answering my questions, so I can see how you think when you hear the things that I say.
Yeah. No, it was great talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you both for coming. Your attendance is definitely very much appreciated.
Thank you for hosting. You're in Northern.